At a high level, this was very confident and competent speech.
Well, I think the mayor came in swinging for the fences.
He focused a lot on the economy and housing.
But convince me that it's going to be okay. Convince me that these taxes were well spent.
Hello, London. I'm Matt Brown, and you're listening to the Matt Brown Podcast. It's another good show for you today because today we're trying something new. It's our first ever podcast-only political panel, and the panelists are London leaders whose names you are sure to recognize. They're going to join us to provide some analysis of last week's State of the City address. And I'll tell you all about it right after this.
Winter's here. It's time to discover the Bicycle Cafe. Cozy up with our daily soup and sandwich, or unwind with an evening latte and Dutch comfort food. London Bicycle Cafe at the Forks of the Thames. See you soon.
The State of the City address has a long history here in London. It's been said to be the largest of its kind right across Canada. It's a London Chamber of Commerce event, and it regularly sells out, with attendance coming in around 1,200 tickets sold. Businesses, for-profit and not-for-profit, purchase tables, and so do many of the city-funded boards, commissions, as well as the corporation of the City of London itself. The mayor's office works for months and months on the presentation. Different mayors have used different approaches to highlight different things, but you can always count on hearing about issues of the day, both the challenges and the opportunities being experienced or anticipated ahead. You'll likely hear about council successes, promises and plans, maybe a big idea or two, and if at all possible, news about new jobs coming to London. The event provides a great opportunity to highlight the work underway. And here's a fun fact. It's also a huge fundraising event for the host, the London Chamber of Commerce. For any mayor, these addresses can be a high-risk, high-reward opportunity, especially so during an election year. It can even be seen by some as the unofficial kickoff to the campaign season 2. Today, we're lucky to have 4 folks who have seen more than their share of these State of the City addresses. Joining us for the first ever political panel are Mojdeh Azad, formerly Mojdeh Cox. She is the founder and consultant at Cox Co. With Mojdeh's name change, she tells us that you can look forward for a new brand reveal of her new consulting company soon. Mojdeh is also a long-standing activist and prominent voice on equity here in London and right across Canada. Also joining is Steve Cordes, recently retired and longtime CEO of Youth Opportunities Unlimited. He's now the host of a video blog you can find on YouTube called Community Matters. Carol Dyck is with us too. Carol is a doctoral student in the Faculty of Law at Western University. Carol is also a previous 5-time Green Party of Ontario and Green Party of Canada candidate for London North. Finally, Paul Hubert joins us too. Paul is the Executive Director of Pathways and a former member of London City Council. He served 3 terms on council as the councillor for Ward 8, including his final term as Deputy Mayor from 2014 to 2018. Paul is also the lead consultant for a firm he started called Delta Consultings. The panelists have all watched the speech at least a couple of times, and likely they've read the transcript too. Today, they're prepared to share their thoughts about some of the key issues highlighted within the speech. They'll provide some analysis and maybe even make a prediction or two about the weeks and months to come. So, with that, let's go. Mojdeh, Steve, Carol, Paul, welcome to the podcast. I'm thrilled that all 4 of you were able to make this show. It's an inaugural event. It's the first political panel, hopefully of many, and we'll see as we work our way through the topics. I've mentioned just off the top that we're talking about the 2026 Chamber of Commerce State of the City address, and I thought we'd just get going right from there. So first up, just overall impressions of the address. It was a different delivery style. What did you think of the format? Did you have any aha moments or strong feelings or opinions overall? Mojdeh, why don't we start with you?
Thanks for the question. I mean, it was definitely what I heard was that it was the largest turnout. This was the first year in many that I've missed this in person when we had it in person. At a high level, this was very confident and a competent speech. And from the perspective of a first term mayor positioning for re-election, I think that really matters. The mayor clearly wanted to demonstrate that the city is being governed with discipline, that decisions are grounded in data, and that London is moving forward rather than standing still. And so that, I think, was a message that came out pretty clear. On that front, the speech does what it was set out to do. But when you step back and hold this address up against the city's own strategic plan, and in my world of consulting, I tend to do this as an immediate reflex response to almost anything that I listen to and hear, and as it relates to things that impact the lives of Londoners. There's a noticeable gap, and particularly around safety for women, girls, and gender diverse people. And this is just one prong that I think was most prominent for me. That priority is explicitly named in the plan, yet it's absent from the speech. And that silence is hard to ignore in a city that has experienced public and very recent public incidences of violence against women, a high profile sexual assault trial, and the broader reality that femicide is being recognized across Ontario as a systemic crisis. My comments aren't necessarily around raising this as a symbolic gesture. It's about whose safety gets named and measured when we talk about public safety, but don't explicitly acknowledge gender-based violence. We end up reinforcing a very narrow definition of harm. Most violence against women doesn't happen on the street. It happens behind closed doors. And if leadership doesn't name it, it's harder to mobilize. And for the great agencies doing this, it's harder to publicly address it as well. And so politically, this speech strengthens the mayor's case as a steady, competent leader, but it also reveals a missed opportunity to show a moral clarity on an issue that is steeped in our strategic plan and deeply affects people's lives and sense of safety in this city.
Okay, well, I think we're off to a good start. Thanks, Mojdeh. And Steve, let's go to you next. Just overall first impressions.
I like the Mayor Unplugged version, i.e. A lot less bells and whistles and more simple, just talking at the crowd. I like that. I think he went a bit too far that way. It would have been nice to have some visuals to support what he was saying, because I had the benefit of listening to the tape that you sent us, the recording of it, a few times, and it was on the second or third time I listened to it, I picked up stuff the first time I didn't pick up at all. So I'm thinking if you're one of the 1,200 people, there would have been some really important messages that would not have hit home from what the mayor was saying. I think not to be critical of the mayor, he's a great speaker, but he missed an opportunity, I think, the mayor did, to recognize the full council that also is at work around the city's successes and failures, as well as the senior administration at the City of London. And I think that it would be really, really important as the leader of council in a way to have brought recognition, not just to the other regional mayors that were in that crowd, not just to the business leaders, but to some of his internal audiences. Aha moment. I think when we talk about issues like homelessness, for a lot of people, that seems like an insurmountable issue, and it's growing, when in fact so is public investments in the problem growing with the issue. I like the visual that he did bring by getting people to stand up half the room. And to me, that was one of the takeaways. I didn't have to be reminded he did that, because it engaged the audience.
And Steve, if you could just describe that for folks listening at home, what that moment was like.
Right. Well, of the 1,200 people in the room, he took a pause to talk about the city's investments in homelessness prevention. He talked about the fact that homelessness is growing. Then he talked about how London in the province and how London is performing better than many other communities in the province. And then he asked half the room to stand up. And those 600 or so people represented the number of people that through the city's investments, through its nonprofit partners and its own staff work, 600 people, so representing half that room, were helped out of homelessness as a result of the investments that the city made. And I thought that was a powerful moment because for especially that crowd, many of the business leaders that would be aware of the issue, how it affects them, how it affects them in their neighborhood, and so on, that it gives a visual and a feeling. Looking around the room, these people symbolically could have been facing homelessness and they weren't because of the important investments that the city made. And then he talked the cumulative efforts that went in the years before that as well. So that was a good aha moment because it's an important issue and it's hard to, if you're not in the field, if you're not facing it day to day, but you just see signs of it, it's hard to really put a humanity onto that because you see signs of it, but you don't experience the humanity in that way. And I thought he did a good job of that.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks, Steve. I think a great start. We're going to dig down a little bit deeper into the homelessness crisis, I'm sure, during our discussion. Carol, how about you?
Yeah, so for this one, it seemed to me like because I've watched the other ones, some in person, some not. This one really came off as sort of a start to kick off the election year. It was just like Steve said, it was not so much acknowledging the city council. I mean, it was the city as a whole, but his role as a mayor and the successes that he had. And so I think for that reason, he focused a lot on the economy and housing, those kinds of issues that are, of course, top of mind, but would be also the things that he would hope would get him reelected. So he came in as a mayor that seemed a lot more confident, certainly than his 2023 speech, which was a great speech, but he started off by getting booed because of the mention of property taxes. I think that would rattle anyone. So for me, it really seemed like, okay, this is what I have accomplished for the next 4 years without explicitly saying, and I hope you'll have confidence in me for the next years coming. For aha moments, I think we'll be getting into some of the issues later. For me, it was more about what wasn't mentioned, much like Mojdeh said, like the things that were not included, and very much how much of the speech was focused on these development and economic issues without really acknowledging some of the social issues that are in the city. So I'm looking forward to talking about those issues as we dive a little bit deeper.
Okay, thanks, Carol. And Paul, you're running anchor on this one.
Yeah.
First impressions.
Well, I think the mayor came in swinging for the fences. He really wanted to hit the ball out of the park. And this, I agree 100% with Carol. This was his election launch speech. I think he was also reacting to a January 18th London Free Press article that said experience, not successes, will give mayors re-election at the edge. And I think that, you and I know our mayor quite well, and he would be quite sensitive to that point. And so I think he chucked a lot out and rewrote it and really focused on accountability, which I think is really smart. You've got 1,200 of the sort of business leaders, if you will, in the room, and you want them to know that you're not talk, your action, and your accomplishments, and all of those sorts of things. We can dig into the numbers a little later because there was a book written years ago about how to lie with numbers, and particularly criminology statistics are. You can cherry pick and find positives in the multitude of stats that are available. But I think he delivered well. It's really interesting when he's behind the platform, he's as stiff as a board. When he's not behind the podium, he's a little bit more relaxed. And then he went right back to the podium at the very end. And I don't know if you all noticed it, he was stiff again. I think when he's more relaxed, he's more winsome. But all in all, you've got to give it, at least an A- on the delivery and overall content. I know Carol, I'll get points from Carol on this one. I don't think the environment was a word in there. Mojdeh has mentioned, diversity and violence against women. When you write these things, it's hard to hit everything, but I think there's some ways in which that could have been worked in terms of what we're about. The other thing that wasn't mentioned was a real sense of who we are. And this is an issue for London as a city, is we struggle. We're not Toronto, we're not Windsor. So who are we as a municipality? And I'm always looking for a vision for Mojdeh, we start with strategic planning. We start, who are you and where do you want to go, right? And that didn't come across so much.
Okay, so covered first impressions, I think, really well in a lot of different directions, a lot of different perspectives. Exactly what I think we were hoping, the five of us, when we have a panel with this kind of depth, experience, and diversity as well of experience. Let's dig a little bit deeper and examine some of the key issues highlighted over the course of the speech. We'll touch on 3 or 4 of them. I want to start with property taxes, which was likely a smart topic to lead with. One could say the elephant in the room, because this term of council raised taxes to a record level, at least in this century, 24 or 25% increase over the course of their term, of their multi-year budget. To boil that down to its simplest form for folks listening, that means if you were paying $4,000 in 2023 in your property taxes annually, you'll be paying just a touch under $5,000 today. So again, a significant increase. I wonder if we could start there. And Paul, why don't we go right back to you?
Yeah, good for for the mayor taking on that elephant in the room. And he will say it was high and now we're bringing it down, right? You always start, because the electorate's memory is short. So
Didn't you just tell us something about a book where you can tell fibs with numbers?
Yeah, exactly. So I understand what he's doing, but at the end of the day, people are struggling to put food on their table. People are struggling with increases of utilities costs. People are struggling, and then they're struggling to pay municipal taxes. And so he was smart to address it up front early, get it out of the way, and move forward. But it's been a tough issue for them.
Yeah, fair enough. Good place to leave it, I think, Paul. Mojdeh, how about you?
So, ironically, we heard that there was booing last time, the topic of property taxes. So I think that the mayor took a bold stance in bringing that up at first point once again. He makes a disciplined case. Reducing projected increases from mid-teens to potentially the low threes is not insignificant. So let's name that. Especially in the current economic climate, debt avoidance and long-term financial planning are real accomplishments. And voters who care about that sort of fiscal responsibility will hear that clearly. Where the framing falls short is that property tax is treated almost entirely, and the mayor is not alone, and this council is not alone in doing this, as a technical problem, a math problem to be managed rather than a social one. Property taxes don't land evenly. We know in this room and on this panel that it doesn't land evenly. Renters pay them indirectly. Seniors on fixed incomes absorb them with very little flexibility and endure them. And lower income homeowners feel them for far more acutely than higher income households. That equity lens is largely missing from this speech, and it didn't ask who is being squeezed or how repeated increases interact with rising housing costs and stagnant wages. It doesn't connect those dots. And it also stops short of naming the deeper issue that property tax is probably one of the least progressive tools we rely on to fund essential services. Politically, this is safe framing. It reassures taxpayers and avoids controversy. But from a justice and community care perspective, it leaves unanswered questions about whether we're willing to push forward for fair municipal revenue tools rather than continue to balance the system on the backs of those with the least room to absorb it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Steve, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I think when people reflect on the term, they would look 4 years ago and say, okay, so property taxes have gone up 24% since that time. And yet I think that time there'd be an impression that the city was overall in better shape. So whether that's real or not, but that's the feeling that's out there. And I think he needs to and needed to address the feeling. And I think he needed to address that the issue that it's not just London, it's a provincial framework. Communities across the province struggle with it. It's not just because London Council deferred infrastructure investments before his term as mayor. There may be an issue to that, and probably Paul and Matt know more about that than I do. But the issue really is where am I going with property taxes as a taxpayer locally? Don't just justify it. That's a re-elect me platform for sure, because they're down, they're better, and so on. And then the math and the story he's telling on the LPS and so on. All that's fine. That's all about re-election. But convince me that it's going to be okay. Convince me that these taxes were well spent. Convince me that that I'm not going to be struggling with that over the next term if I re-elect largely the same council again. Are we going to be looking at another 25%, 24% in the next year, next council? Or is this just a one-off experience? And now we're in stably at 3 to 4 to less than 3%. He said he might come in at. So I think the context matters. And I think that it was a safe story to make today or on his speech. And I think he did a good job on that. But I think there's an untold story about the context around all of this that would have been really, I think, good for our community to have heard.
Yeah, great. I think, you make some really good points, and you only get to blame the last council once in a situation like this. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens as we move forward into the next term of council and what that makeup of that council might be. This was promised to us to be, a one-time readjustment because previous councils had underspent, had artificially kept the taxes low. It's a soundbite, but I think that there are a lot of members of this current council that were members of previous councils, including the current mayor, to be fair. So I don't think that this should have been a surprise if budget numbers were being kept artificially low, because he was at the decision-making table, and so were a number of other councillors from past term that transferred over to this term. Carol, how about
Matt,
you?
just before you move on, and Carol, just to jump in, don't forget, he's got strong mayor powers now. And he owned this budget for the last 4 years. He pushed it through. So that's a difference over the previous thing where it was the council as a whole. He has new power.
Actually, that's a good point. I think we'll talk about strong mayor powers. It'll probably come up a couple of times during our discussion. Thanks, Paul. Carol, over to you.
Yeah, so there's a lot to build on here, and actually Mojdeh and I have talked about the property taxes on other political panels before. So building on these issues, one of the things I do want to talk about is what Mojdeh just said about the equity aspect of it, because I have talked to a lot of seniors, particularly a year ago when there was the provincial election. Even though, it's a municipal issue, there's still that crossover where people are going to bring that issue up anyways, because it affects their everyday life. And so there are these seniors that are struggling with paying their property taxes and then also trying to get food. And so we already know that there are these issues of affordability, that more people are visiting the food bank, and particularly seniors are suffering. So then it's exactly to what Steve is saying. If you are getting to a point where you are squeezed to pay your property taxes, you want to be able to feel that the city is moving in a positive direction and that there is some tangible improvements to what is going on in the city. And that is exactly what he should have been highlighting. He does talk about the successes, but I think it needed to be done in a more personal way. I felt like it was so much more based on infrastructure and less on people and the impact on people's lives and how it's improving their day to day. Like, we are investing in this. It was just too business oriented for me. And so as much as we need to increase property taxes, it needs to happen because the demands are so much more on the community. There are infrastructure projects that have to be taken care of. And we know that like the federal and particularly the provincial government are not stepping in enough to help with a lot of the requirements and the needs the cities have. Then, we have an issue where the property taxes have to increase. They increase them, but show us that you're spending the money correctly, and don't just make it an election issue where you say, okay, it was here, but now I've dropped it to here. And I'm sure, as we said, he was keeping in mind the groan/boo that happened a few years back, because people are going to remember this when they get to their, voting time, and they'll think, okay, I have really struggled to pay these taxes, and I don't think my city has improved. Does this person deserve to be reelected? Especially if they're using strong mayor powers to own the budget.
Yeah, and I think really what you're talking about is the value proposition. It's important to invest in our community. It's important to invest in ourselves. And what are the community benefits that come out of that? And how do we treat all populations across our community in a fair and equal way? And is there value for money? I think is a number of you have raised that point. We're going to move on to a topic that is really directly connected to the tax increase that we experienced, and what I think will be seen as a legacy of this council as well. The police budget increased by 30% over a 4-year period. So it was expected, if it were tracking along at a regular pace, to be at about a $450 million investment, which is a significant investment. The 30% increase brought that up to a $672 million investment in policing over the course of the 4 years. And I'm just wondering where that's landing with people. And Carol, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I've, again, talked about this issue quite a few times because it was such a big issue for the city, this increase to the police budget of 30%. And well, people felt that there was much better ways. Like if we are increasing our property taxes, as we were just saying, is this the best value for our money for investing in our community? And so we know, like other organizations, and I know there's city councillors that are quick to say, oh, but there was increases to the budgets of others as well, like the public library. But they only got an increase of 7%. And a lot of those locations are really struggling. So with this, there's going to be winners and losers. And I know that they were trying to be fiscally responsible, but in this case, I feel like the community really came out as a loser. And for some examples, I would say the fact that they cut the community grants, the neighborhood planning has been put on pause. And those are instances where, that's money that is well invested. You get the community involved, you get young people involved, and they also see the tangible result. They have a project that they want, and it's actually put forward. And when you actually invest in those kinds of projects, it does make your community safer. It does make it a healthier place. It brings a lot to, neighborhoods and people getting to know each other. And those are the kinds of things that can actually help so that you don't need to spend quite so much money on the police. I mean, obviously, we have some serious crime issues. I know even in my neighborhood, people that have experienced break-ins and they're waiting hours and hours for the police to show up. So obviously, we have to address those issues of security. But I think that, if you're asking people for huge sums of money and you're making cuts in other areas to be fiscally responsible, I think some of the other projects that got cut, as saying the winners and losers, in some of these instances, the long-term impacts for that are actually going to be more significant in the way that they are not making London the kind of city that we want, like a real community-friendly based place.
Okay, thanks, Carol. And Paul, you have some lived experience here. You worked on 12 budgets as a municipal councillor. And of course, policing was always a topic. Emergency services was always a topic. I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are on this with that experience that you bring to the table here as well.
Well, I have to say, I was gobsmacked at the size of the increase. I've, as you say, sat through 12 sessions, probably twice as many with every police chief since I was on council in 2006, beating on us to give them more money. And, we spent a lot of money on a new headquarters or a revamped headquarters, and it seems like it's more. The term modernizing of policing is an interesting way of justifying a large increase, and that concerns me. I also think, and I think it's a systemic problem when you have the head of the city, the head of city council, the mayor, who sits on the police services board. I think the person's automatically in conflict of interest. I don't know how you distinguish those and look at it objectively. You're sitting around that table. It takes a lot of work. Yeah, the numbers are thrown out. While 38% fewer homicides. Well, I'd like to know how many homicides were the year before, because if you have a small n, it doesn't take very many to lower at 38%.
And when you say N, for those of us who aren't
Sorry.
statisticians, you mean sample size,
Sample
right?
size. Sorry, Carol, laugh. But, if you have 45% fewer carjackings, well, how many carjackings have there been? To Mojdeh, how many incidents of domestic violence were reported? And have we done anything about that? What's our response time? Are we doing better on some of those things? Is 70% drop in service complaints? I would go, that's good. That's good. I mean, that's a customer service measure. Terrific. So the statistics seem good, but are we safer? And safety is a perception more than a reality. So when people walk the streets, as Steve and I have, and I know Mojdeh, you have, when my office was on Dundas Street every single day for 17 years, walking that stretch, do I feel safer? Do my staff feel safer walking to work downtown? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So how do we address the perception of it? And I don't care how much money you throw at it, that may not necessarily do that. And in fact, when we put more officers on the streets, and by the way, our police service is very good. Okay, no shade on them at all. I expect your crime stats to go up, not go down, because your reporting increases, the amount of officers you have that are out there to intervene goes up. All of those things tends to drive reporting up. It's kind of one of those counterintuitive things. And I don't want to get too geeky as a sociologist, but crime statistics are very difficult to really discern. Is it more money making this difference? Or is it more efficient methods? Or is it how we're deploying people? Those are all sorts of questions that a mayor's speech can't really address.
Mojdeh, how about you?
Thanks for punting it over. The framing of public safety by the mayor was very intentional, I felt. I really felt that part of the speech to be calculated and intentional. He points to clear outcomes, reductions in violent crime, faster response times, all of the things that was mentioned by Paul earlier, fewer complaints. And he ties those outcomes to sustained investment. From a political standpoint, that's a strong and defensible argument. I want to be clear that the rest of what I'm saying isn't necessarily a critique on the London Police itself or the budget they proposed and had the backing of council to pass. The focus I'd like to place here is on how safety is being framed at the municipal leadership level. The speech positions policing as the primary driver of safety, with health and social supports layered in alongside it. That framing works for many audiences, but it also narrows the conversation. Safety is not produced only at the point of response. It's produced long before that through housing stability, mental health supports, income security, and community connections. When those upstream factors are weak, police are asked to manage social crises they didn't create, nor are they positioned to eliminate. The speech gestures towards the reality or that particular reality, but it doesn't fully grapple with it. A more expansive vision of public safety would make it clear that policing outcomes are only one part of the picture, not the whole story. And politically, this framing stabilizes confidence, which serves him as the mayor. But long term, safety will depend truly on how seriously we invest in prevention, care, and the conditions that reduce harm in the first place, well before the 911 call is placed.
All of those upstream investments.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Steve.
I'll jump in on a couple of the stats that the mayor shared, which I thought were illustrative of the investment. One was what Paul already spoke about, and that was the service complaints being reduced by 70%, I think the number was. And the other was response time on non-emergency calls that were improved by about 50%. And weave that into what Mojdeh, I think, made a very good point about, and that was about the perception, the feeling of safety. And I think Carol talked about that too. And so for all of that, and we had new police chief come in the last few years that pointed out what he saw as the underinvestments in policing for many years in London, and where that left a police service that was incapable of responding to the level of complaints, concerns, and issues that they were facing on a day-to-day basis. So all of that to say, I think there's a case to be made for the increase that was granted. I don't know that he fully made the case. I think he made part of the case. I think Paul makes a good point that yes, inherently there's a conflict when you've got a mayor with strong mayor powers who's also on the police services board and representing the best interests of two organizations that might come to disagreements at times. So that's an inherent challenge in the structure of the services board. But aside from that, what I would want to know, and I think what a lot of Londoners would want to know, and I think would benefit our community, was what's the yardstick? What are the measures upon which we could foresee ourselves reducing investments in police over time? If the issue was that there were significant safety issues, perceptions of safety, the downtown neighborhoods or whatever did not feel safe, people's non-emergency response calls were taking 80 hours on average, those are real issues. So as they get addressed and as they get improved and as other social safety nets kick in over time, and perhaps we're going to see a reduction in homelessness, we're going to see perhaps a reduction in some of the other issues that become issues that land on police services laps. How do we then reduce funding or stop increasing at least? Something like that. I'm not talking about defunding the police or anything. I'm just talking about how do you right size a budget when you increase it by 30% because you're responding to some significant issues. And then you've done a good job and maybe you can start pulling back in those investments. How does that happen? And I don't have confidence that any council has a good sight line on that. And therefore I don't think this one does. And I do think that that's part of the untold story. It's all the social framework altogether. It's not just police.
Yeah, and I hear you. You're not saying defund the police. The term I've heard before is, once an increase has been introduced, how do you shave the peak off the mountain to ensure that increase doesn't continue? Development was, of course, an issue in these remarks. It always is an area of focus. And specifically, I want to talk about the commitment of 57,000 new homes being built by 2031. That was a commitment that was made. And also it was pointed out that rental affordability is coming back into alignment. In fact, sometimes when you're renting, you might even get a free month's rent. And I wonder what you think that this area of the speech, how it impacted the overall theme, and also whether you think that a city council can really have a lot of influence over something like rent levels in a city this size. And Steve, let's just stick with you.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. I think that the fact that we have more rental supply and housing supply, I think, has been one of the biggest changes in overall rates. So to the effect that the city was able to help advance developers' plans and incentivize some of the building that's going on and have land ready and so on. All of that. Yeah, some kudos to them and to the mayor for doing that. I think the decreases in rent and in housing costs are not just a London story, though. Like that's happening in communities all across Canada, in fact. So maybe every mayor is doing all the good work that our mayor is doing too. I don't know, but I think that there's good news on that front. However, housing is such a complex issue, and I think, given my 40-year career, I can't think that we can talk about housing without talking about homelessness and the numbers of people we've covered on that earlier in the podcast who are struggling to maintain housing that they have, and small little changes that can push people out of the market, as well as so vulnerably housed people, precariously housed people, as well as the growing levels of homelessness due to there not being a stable amount of affordable housing in the city. So I think that on that front, I can't give council a pass on that front, but I recognize the efforts on their part, but can't give them a pass on that part because it's a lot of talk and just not enough action on that front.
Okay, Carol?
Yeah, so I mean, it's great. There's lots of construction. We can see that there's lots of construction going on, and there is the decrease in rental costs. I will say, I believe part of that, I can't be sure, is because of the federal government's reduction in international students. I think that really reduced the pressure in some areas. And so particularly in London, where we've got Fanshawe College and we've got Western, part of that might be attributed to a decrease in student enrollment. But yeah, like Steve said, I mean, you want to also see those tangible differences. And I know actually quite a few people, I mean, quite a few, let's say 4, it's still a lot. 4 people who are employed, working every single day, and they are homeless. They are currently couch surfing, moving from place to place. And that's unacceptable to be working every single day. You're taking care of your children. In some cases, they have to be separated from their children because of this situation. And that's really not the way it should be within our society. And so we need to be doing a lot more to address those issues. Now, I will say I did appreciate that he mentioned about the money that's been put towards people getting to do modular homes in their backyards in different areas. That's fantastic. I actually know some people who have taken advantage of that. It is huge for people who have elderly parents that they're not sure what they're going to do with them because they can't live on their own. And yet, there is not a lot of places in long-term care. It's also very important for those families that have children with special needs that are now adults, but they also can't live on their own. So I think that's fantastic. And there needs to be a lot more investment, like grants in those areas, because it makes a huge difference. And it's also infill in the city. And now some of the people that I know that have taken advantage of that currently have children that are special needs. If later they no longer need that spot for that particular use, they can use it to rent out for, other students or, for families that need that home. So I really think that's a great direction to go. And I'm very glad to hear about that. But one of the things, he did mention, kind of tangentially how this was related to like the infill and the environment. I do think that there's a lot more work that London can do with that to make the communities, if you're building housing, make them more connected. Because especially with the affordability crisis, you need to make sure that there are ways that people can get to their homes, to their jobs cheaply. And that means having access to public transportation or having access to bike routes or being able to walk safely. There has to be those viable options. And right now, quite a few of the new developments are so disconnected from any kind of grocery store or community hub that adds an additional cost for people. So, great that they're building lots of houses, but I think there needs to be more consideration for connectedness and more work on the infill.
Okay, thanks for that. I think a number that I'm familiar with is, if you as a family can not have a car, or if you can get away with not having a second car, each vehicle is, at the time, was about ten to $12,000 per year on your household bottom line. And I'm sure it's more than that. And that's just maybe a tangible figure that backs up some of the points that you were making. How about you, Paul?
Well, I felt like this part of the speech fell flat, frankly. I mean, I deal with people who are looking for jobs every day. They're struggling, staff that are, not making big bucks, and they're struggling. Even my own kids, like, I don't know, Dad, like, so yeah, it's come down $50 or $100 a month. That's not in the realm of affordability, and so, I felt it just didn't resonate with me very much at all. I think all of the things, there's no silver bullet here, but the ARUs, the backyard things, the increasing housing units, that's all good. But when we talk about the average cost of a house, being around the 600,000, I kind of go, oh my goodness, like that's, like, holy cow, that's huge. And how does a 25-year-old or a 35-year-old, where do they, here again, identity, how do they see themselves in the city? Where do they see their place in the city? So all of those things are good, and I think it's great that they're trying. I mean, obviously downtown, the initiatives of converting office space to housing is a good thing. Um, some criticism about who's benefiting from that incentives has been out there, but we're not affordable. We're still not affordable. We're still excluding people. We're still marginalizing people, and from opportunities. And I think, Carol mentioned it. And, Matt, you and I have the scars from it. Rapid transit was not even mentioned. And there still is not a rapid transit across Oxford Street from Richmond, and yet Oxford and Wonderland is a transit hub. There are thousands of new apartments going to be built at Oxford and Wonderland and at Oxford and Beaverbrook. I haven't forgotten my urban geography. And so the development applications are predicated on there not being parking for cars. So there has to be a functioning rapid transit. I am amazed at the number of my staff that don't drive. They have to be able to get to work in a reasonable amount of time at a reasonable cost on public transit.
Mojdeh, how about you?
Thanks. Without having to repeat many of the great points already mentioned, on development and infrastructure, the mayor in this speech pointed to numbers to say London is building and that alone deserves recognition. The speech framed growth as momentum and confidence, and that's important politically for him and in an election year. He wanted to signal that London is open for investment and that projects are moving and that the city isn't paralyzed by process. And I think that he did that in a good way. If that was what his clear intention was, that's what I gathered from what he was trying to get across. Where the analysis needs more depth is connecting growth to what was already mentioned by other panelists, to equity. Housing is treated as a supply challenge rather, and how much we build or how fast and where we build. But volume alone doesn't tell us who is actually benefiting. The wait list for subsidized housing continues to grow. There has been no announcements around social housing investments. That is a distinct responsibility of the city. And deeply affordable units remain in really short supply and dangerously short supply, as we know. Infrastructure and development, I think it needs to be said loud and clear, are not neutral. They shape who gets to stay in the city and who gets pushed to the margins. So the speech, though rightfully in a way celebrates what's being built, it doesn't fully address who is still being left out. And the mayor alone is not the only one that's doing this. The approach, time and time again, as we talk about, particularly development as it relates to housing, this is a repetitive pattern. Politically, the mayor is right to highlight growth, but if we want to have a more honest and clear and justice-oriented lens on the city and want to bring everyone along, the trajectory of the success in these numbers, this particular depth will ask us to measure success not just by cranes in the skyline, but by whether people can actually afford to live here. And so oftentimes when I'm asked, sometimes I apologize about seemingly not being a great ambassador for the city by saying, do not come to London if you're looking for an affordable place to live. It is no longer that. It used to be closer to that narrative where I could say to, 30-something-year-old couples starting a family that London can be safe and affordable and have things within relative reach. I think we've shifted quite a bit since those times, even though we had our own distinct challenges then too. So I think where we are right now in these economic times, we can't fall short in only highlighting growth and not measuring how well we're doing as a city by who can afford to stay and live here with dignity.
Okay, one of the things that I think is not surprising to me, and probably not surprising to you or to folks listening to this podcast, that although we try and parse these out into separate issues, into pillars, if you will, there's a whole lot of overlap. And where I want to go next was an issue that, Steve, you raised in your initial comments, and that's homelessness in London. At one point during the speech, as you pointed out, the mayor asked half of the room to stand up. Everybody sitting at odd tables to stand up to represent the 600 people that had received housing for the first time in a long time for many of these folks in the past year. And that was, I think, a powerful, visceral moment. He also indicated that if everybody stood up in the room, the 1,200 people in attendance, that wouldn't account for the 1,500 people that have experienced housing over the past 3 years. I also hear some members of council saying in the media that London's bucking the trend here when it comes to the homelessness crisis. And they claim to be doing better than the Ontario average. I think I heard this in the speech as well. It was highlighted that, well, the average of growth in homelessness since 2022 in Ontario has been 25%. What we're hearing from our leaders is that London has only grown by 19%. I wonder, given the context in which we find ourselves as a community, what are your thoughts on this portion of the address? What are your thoughts on the work that council has done in this area? And Mojdeh, let's stick with you for this one.
Sure, thanks. So thanks for highlighting those numbers. The mayor is right to say that progress on homelessness can be hard to see. And the data that he shared about people being housed in many ways matters and can't be omitted from our overall analysis. If we're sticking to the speech and what we can look ahead to over the course of this year, being an election year, we can nod that, yes, London has helped hundreds of people move off the streets and onto supportive housing, clearly reduces strain on emergency services and overall improves lives. And with the numbers that you shared, the 25% and London's increase being closer to 19%, where homelessness has increased by 25% and so on, that suggests that local interventions are making a difference. So, the hats tip to all of the folks who are in the nonprofit sector across agencies, really trying to collaborate in a way that has not happened before to do this. So, despite broader forces that push in the opposite direction, and we've seen this happen a few times over the course of this past year, and even before that. What the speech doesn't fully grapple with is this tension Londoners feel every day. People see still see tents, for example, still see encampments. On the more compassionate way of describing this, we need to understand that when people see tents, people are living in tents and people still are residing in encampments. So it's not just really about our comfort of what we're out of sight, out of mind is what we'd like it all to be. We still see human suffering in public spaces. That reality doesn't disappear just because some progress has been made. So we want to hold that tight. The framing leans heavily on cost savings and systems efficiency, which are important, but less on dignity and rights. People shouldn't have to prove they are cheaper housed than unhoused to justify care. Yeah, and that's not human dignity, and that's not a human rights approach and a compassionate approach. And I know there's other folks on this panel that are far more steeped into these matters and see it far more intimately than I do, where I live and work. Politically, it's understandable to emphasize success, but sustaining public support for a long-term solution requires naming the crisis more honestly, even while acknowledging what's working. And I mean, if we don't have a critical analysis of where we've been and where we want to go, we're not honestly naming things, I really think our strategies will fall short. So I'm really actually quite excited to hear what others on the panel have to say about this based on their, positionality and community. But these are my reflections.
Yeah, it's a nice little alley-oop over to Steve as well, because Steve, given your 40-year career working in many ways in this area, I think everyone's curious to hear what you have to say.
I was looking for the mayor to name and confront the NIMBYism that is growing so much in our community, and I think that would have been an important thing for him to do. We had one hub site fail last year because the folks in Northwest London were able to push it out. We had a zoning application on one at the old CJBK radio station fail because residents in that neighborhood were able to gather 1,400 signatures or whatever. He has one of his own councillors going pretty hard at any provision of services and wrapping that up in a budget and an accountability framework. And while he can't maybe go at councillors as much as I would like him to, he could go at the issue because I mean, look at. I think it's a great initiative bringing up just this week. But part of the reason of why it is where it is because it was in a neighborhood that could support it. And even last night on the news, there were some of the businesses there in the area saying, well, I don't know, we got to sit tight and see what happens here and so on. And I think it's in a farmer's field. And I don't know where else you could go. And this whole good neighbor policy that was potentially in front of council at some point, like it didn't pass yet, but who knows where it's going to go. The thought of it is there. And I think to Mojdeh's point and points from others as well, we have to talk about equity issues. And I think the mayor had an opportunity to confront NIMBYism by talking about how important it is that we confront these, how important it is that we make space in neighborhoods all around the city for affordable housing initiatives. People need to be able to live throughout the city because folks that are currently experiencing homelessness, they either will have or do have children that need to go to schools. They have the same rights and the same aspirations for their children growing up and playing in parks. And they have the same, aspirations for being close to where they work or where they go to school. And they probably, far more than any other part of the population, lack the resources to buy a car, let alone the desire to own a car. And so therefore, we have to think about, this being something that gets spread throughout the city. And he could have nailed that far more directly because it makes it harder, not just for the city to get affordable and supportive housing spaces opened. It makes it harder for a service provider even to announce an expansion of a program because neighborhoods have had success in even stopping the conversation. And I think that that is so regrettable for our community. And it becomes it's such an important social framework that I think he had an opportunity to speak out in front of 1,200 business leaders.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Steve. Carol, how about you?
So Steve actually touched on many of the points that I wanted to make, because it seems to me in 2023, when he had his State of the City address, his main focus was homelessness. And obviously he doesn't want to have that as his main focus. As said, this is kind of the launch of a campaign speech. That's not necessarily maybe the area he wants to focus. But when he made that announcement of the $25 million donation, there seemed to be a lot of optimism that we are going to be able to accomplish so much. And then the 3 years following that, reality has hit. And it is exactly what Steve is talking about. There's a number of issues. There's issues coming directly from the council, and then there's issues coming from the community. It is incredibly disappointing that those two hubs did not happen because of community pushback. And I mean, the one that's at Northwest at Wonderland in Fanshawe is right close in my neighborhood. And if you can't put that there, and it is, women, it was going to be women and children, that is extremely low risk. It was only going to be about 25 people, but that's 25 human beings that you are helping. And the excuses that were given, like, oh, it's going to cause a problem for traffic. Well, there is an enormous apartment building going up there right next to that pub that was going to be converted, that motel. I think that's going to cause more of a traffic issue than 25 people moving in who are probably going to be using public transportation. So I would say for me, this part, I mean, it does mean something when you say, okay, we've helped 1,500 people, but obviously the numbers are still going to be going up if you're still having 19% growth. For my end, I feel like the last 3 years have been extremely adversarial on the part of the city council. Yes, there's been efforts to help, but exactly like what Steve was talking about, this good neighbor situation that they're trying to push through, I find that infuriating. You have people that are working in a very difficult situation. They are trying to help the community. And I can guarantee that if they were not there, the situation would be infinitely worse. They cannot be blamed for the actions that are happening around their area. I mean, there was even reference to something that had happened 2 blocks away from an organization. Are you responsible for something that happens 2 blocks away? I do not think so. I mean, what is your geographical radius here for like responsibility for the impacts on this city? If you're investing so much in police, then, have them deal with that situation. But for me, it really feels like you have all these organizations, people that are extremely burnt out. We've had an absolute explosion of people with mental health issues because of the pandemic, loss of jobs, affordability issues, homelessness, all these issues. And so already they're burnt out. And then you have the city working against you or villainizing you, putting that out there on social media. I mean, what does that do to a person who is trying so hard to improve people's lives, and the city that is supposed to back you is throwing you under the bus over and over and over again. So for me, I mean, great, you've helped people, but can we change the narrative? Can we change the way we're acting? And can we stop trying to pit the city and businesses against these organizations? I really hope that the next council coming in is not so negative and adversarial.
This is where I'm picturing you dropping the mic. And Paul, we're going to go to you, but good luck.
Yeah, there's so much here, and there's no silver bullet. I mean, supportive housing has got to be, Steve, you've been such a pioneer in this area for so many, many years. And I agree we have to reframe how we see people in our community. They are not the enemy. And I have never, being downtown for 25 years, I've had people sleeping on my doorstep and whatnot. I have never had anyone ever get angry with me, ever be rude to me, ever be anything but anything but being a good neighbor. And yet we demonize them and we see their deficiencies. And you know, my early years working in an inner city psychiatric hospital in Toronto, I still have memories of the human people that I dealt with and the stories and the lessons that I learned. And when we see them as that, as a human being, as a brother, a sister, mother, daughter, father, then all of a sudden we have another conversation in our community. And that leads to us being a compassionate city, a caring city, a city where all are welcome.
So I'm going to move to our final topic before we move to close off this conversation, which has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Almost every state of the city that I've been to or been a part of comes with a closer, a big announcement. And there was a big announcement at this state of the city, a $5 million fund to cover the cost of development charges for new homes costing less than the average price of a new home. And for folks listening at home, development charges pay for the hard and soft infrastructure related to the cost of development. So that pays for the pipes that go to your house to bring the water there and to bring the water back. It pays for the road, but it also pays for things like the impact on parks and libraries. And I just wonder what people thought of that announcement, whether it was a big announcement or whether it felt like something different to them. And Paul, can we just stick with you for that one?
Yeah, it's interesting approach. I think there's merit in thinking about it. Someone has to pay the development charges. So let's be clear. Those don't disappear. So that means other people in the city are going to pick up the tab for that. And I know there's some provincial funding involved. It's interesting that it's not getting an easy ride through council. And, you know, they're putting some additional stipulations on it, but $600,000. Is that affordable? You know, is that an entry level house? $600,000. So I wouldn't say it's a massive announcement. I don't know that it's a game changer. I think it's a pilot project, frankly. And, you know, pilot projects are interesting to try. And, you know, if it works, maybe there's something that the feds can do around this. But it's a long game on that one.
Mojdeh?
Yes, so very great points, Paul. I'll try not to reiterate them, but this incentive is one of the more interesting elements of the speech for me, not because it's a solid policy piece. I do feel that it falls short of people's expectations of a major policy announcement or a mayoral, address like the one that we witnessed. On the positive side, I think he did a good job in highlighting his child in the space. It acknowledges generational inequity in home ownership, and tries to lower one of the real barriers, which is those upfront costs. Although it's actually quite masked as a removal of a barrier because you still have to foot that bill up front and get it back as a rebate. The shared cost model with builders is pragmatic and avoids placing the full burden if a home buyer is able to fall within this tight stipulations of the program. That said, this program helps people who are already so close to home ownership. It does very little to nothing for those who are structurally locked out of the housing market altogether. It's a bridge for some, but actually not a solution for most. So it's very few people, I think, that it will impact. There's also the question of trade-offs, and I think Paul mentioned this. Development charges on the infrastructure, reducing them even temporarily means that these costs show up somewhere else, and often in the long term, and often really off the public's back. So politically, this is a cautious pilot that best way I can frame it is that it signals action without overcommitting to anything. it can be promising for those who are just on the edge of being able to afford to buy a home, and this makes it even more of an incentive to take that risk. But it shouldn't be oversold. This wasn't anything that was gasp worthy. It actually, the entire speech in itself could have had more layered policy elements like this if the mayor was positioned to announce as such. It fell short entirely on real policy driven ideas like this. As being the only policy idea revealed on its own, it doesn't meaningfully reshape affordability in my eyes. It needs to be a part of a much larger strategy. It's not a bad idea, but I think to one councillor's point, there needs to be an off ramp if it's not working, and if we're not measuring, what are we actually going to be measuring here? So it was uneventful for me. I don't particularly think it was overly innovative in the sense that it can impact who we want to reach right now. Where are the pressure points?
Okay, Steve?
We've talked a lot about housing in this one, haven't we? So, so in terms of if it's anything on housing, I guess, yeah. But like both my predecessors in this topic, I saw it as a pilot project announcement. Kind of like, okay, this is the big announcement. Didn't hit that. I would have loved to have seen learned more about the success of the conversion from office to residential, knowing that so many buildings it's cost prohibitive, and so there's some buildings sitting empty because of that. Well, was there consideration that this money could actually be reinvested in that and push some more buildings where it would actually make sense and therefore create housing for more people? So I'm not sure what the thought process from the mayor on that one was, but like the others, I'll just leave it as okay. It's an okay pilot project, but certainly not a big project to make a lot of hay about.
Okay, Carol, what about you?
Yeah, so basically the same. It fell flat for me. It seemed like something that could have been tucked in the earlier part of his speech when he was talking about housing and how they're building things. I mean, if you're going to do your big announcement, do something that really will either unify or excite the whole city. This isn't going to affect a lot of people. It's something that may or may not work. It might help, it might not. Tuck it earlier in the speech as something that you're thinking about when you're talking about housing, and end with something that is maybe uplifting or unifying for the city, and this just wasn't it.
Okay. Well, listen, it's been a great hour plus discussion. I want to leave our listeners with a last impression from each of you in a way of summarizing things. And I think that we heard about a city council and a corporation of the City of London and a mayor's perspective of the state of the city. How did that land for you overall? Carol?
Okay, well, I feel like I have to end. It would be completely remiss of me if I did not mention that he did not talk about any environmental or climate issues. And the reason why this is really important for me is that, we did declare climate change as an emergency in the city, and it is an equity issue. It is it's a health issue. It's a social issue. And by not addressing that at all, I think that does a real disservice, because those who suffer the most from the extreme weather events that we're witnessing right now with the extreme cold that's going on, and people can't imagine it right now, but we will get back into the summer when there is going to be extreme heat, and people who are living outside are going to suffer in that. And it's the most vulnerable. It is your seniors, children, those that are unwell, who are going to suffer from that and can suffer with the loss of their lives. And so for me, I feel like he could have at least discussed that. And I think that currently our city council, probably he didn't address it because our city council hasn't been paying attention to it. It's just not important. It's not top priority. And I understand that whenever there's economic issues, and we've got everything happening south of the border, the environment gets pushed to the side. However, the effects of that are felt by people right here, right now, and especially our most vulnerable. And so we have a council where, there are proposals that are put forward, and some of the councillors vote those things down one after another after another. And I think there's going to be long-term impacts of that. I would like to see more engagement in how are we going to adapt our city to address these issues because flooding, heat, extreme cold is going to affect the most vulnerable. So for me, I was really disappointed that he did not address those issues so much. And I'm overall relatively disappointed in this council for, pushing those issues to the side all the time, because it will catch up to us. And then the costs of that are going to be exponentially higher.
How about you, Paul? Final impressions?
I'm always amazed when a council is focused on the bits and pieces and they just lack a cohesive vision for the city. And I think that's true of this council. They're more focused on this issue or that issue, and I would lay that at the mayor's feet is, where are we going? Who do we want to be? And then what are our priorities? And I'm looking forward to them as they get into election season to say, who are we? What do you want us to be? What are your priorities for the city? So what's the vision? What's our identity? And how are we moving forward on those things?
Thanks for that, Paul. And Mojdeh, how about you?
Well, if I want to tie what my lens and perspective is ahead for 2026 and looking back on what 2025 revealed through this council as a whole, by way of analyzing this speech, it all goes back to the emphasis on performance. And in many ways, the city is performing well, but performance isn't the same as justice or doing the right thing and lifting, doing the heavy lifting when it's uncomfortable. Safety that doesn't include women and gender diverse people isn't complete. Housing growth that doesn't reach those that are most at risk isn't particularly great success. It's some success. London has proven it can manage complexity. We've had a pretty wild ride over the last decade or so. Now the challenge is whether it's prepared to lead with the same confidence, as we heard in this speech, when the issues are uncomfortable and political and deeply human. And so what I hope for this council for the year ahead, and particularly in this election year, is to truly, I encourage them to get uncomfortable with being deeply honest about who we are, who we want to become, what are the barriers, the obstacles. And at the very root of all of this, we must center those who are at the highest level of need, the highest level of risk to great need, and bring them up. So though we have sort of this broader federal narrative of where's the middle class, I feel like those are not the individuals particularly that should be top of mind on our priority list when we have tents, encampments, femicide, and direct violence, economically, socially, politically addressed at marginalized people, and that number being one that is exponentially growing. So what I hope for council is the wish for honesty and courage. I think that's what we need in 2026.
Okay, thank you. And Steve, last word goes to you.
I expected, and I wish I was hearing more about how we were lifting each other up. We covered a lot of heavy topics today, and the mayor touched on a number of them in his address. But I felt like, similar to Paul's comment, there wasn't any real time spent on what's the community we want to be, what's the vision around all of this, what do we want for our most vulnerable and our most disconnected Londoners that many Londoners do enjoy and take for granted and enjoy their privilege, and that's wonderful, but recognizing that that's not available to everybody. And what can we do as a city that helps pull more people into that big, celebratory, wonderful London tent that is there, but there's so many parts of our population that are just not there. And I think that business has a role to play with that, and certainly neighborhoods do. And I think our political leaders, the mayor, of course, being the primary one, has the opportunity and I think the responsibility to pave the platform, to pave the way, so that that happens more often. And I don't, there wasn't enough of that. If he's listening, he's probably having a hard time getting to the end of this, thinking, "Holy shit, did I do anything right?" And he did, but he didn't create the vision, and he didn't make room for us as a community, whether we're in business, nonprofit, or whatever. He didn't make room for us as a community to figure out how we can help achieve that vision. And I was hoping I would have heard that, and I didn't.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And also, thank you for the profanity. I can now claim that on the podcast. Maybe downloads will go up. I'm not sure. But in all seriousness, you do raise a good point. Public service is hard. I also want to say that, regardless of the outcome of these discussions, it's fair enough. The folks on this panel are saying, look, we can do better, and we want to see better. And that's a community's right to say those things. But I think it's also really important that we recognize, the level of service that is provided and sacrifice that our elected officials are making each and every day as well. And I think you said that too, Steve. That's a good place to leave it. Mojdeh, Steve, Carol, Paul, thanks for being members of the first ever political panel on this podcast. Let's do it again the next time a big issue pops up here in London. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation.
Let's do it in October after the municipal election. We can talk about what do we want this new council to do.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be fun. Yeah.
And we'll be back to close out the show right after this.
Winter is here. Time to discover Bicycle Cafe. Cozy up with our daily soup and sandwich, or unwind with an evening latte and Dutch comfort food. London Bicycle Cafe at the Forks of the Thames. See you soon.
Okay, that's the show. As always, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you know a little bit more about London's most recent State of the City address than you did about an hour ago. Thanks to Mojdeh, Steve, Carol, and Paul for joining the panel, and thank you for listening. I hope there will be a good response to this special edition of our show, and if there is, you can expect more of them to come. As always, we want to hear from you. You can reach us at the mattbrownpodcast@gmail.com. Tell us what you think. Tell us what you want us to cover in a future show. And thanks to everyone who's already doing so. With that, that's the show. I'm Matt Brown, and you've been listening to the Matt Brown Podcast. It's the show about all things London, and maybe some other stuff too. As always, thanks for listening. Bye for now, and talk to you again soon. London.